This video explores the Kars connections, examining underhanded British intelligence and the rise of Turkish nationalism between 1919 and 1921. Dr. O'Connor and Dr. Mamikonian visited a historical church in Kars and were met by two people. They were led to an undisclosed location, where they learned more about the time Anna's great-great-grandfather lived and wrote in his notebook. Following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, Allied occupation zones were established across Anatolia. This power vacuum created strategic anxieties for the British and sparked international competition over post-Ottoman governance. British aims in Anatolia were to prevent Soviet expansion, secure imperial routes and oil interests, and manage Allied ambitions. They sought stability through a proxy administration. British intelligence efforts were fragmented across multiple departments, suffering from poor coordination and rivalries between the War Office and the Foreign Office. Conflicting reports were sent to MI2 and MI3. The Eastern question was revisited, as Britain feared a power vacuum after the Ottoman collapse. Competing visions for the region and instability threatened vital British imperial interests. Mustafa Kemal emerged as the central figure for Turkish nationalism, successfully uniting diverse resistance movements. The National Pact defined goals for borders and sovereignty, increasing resistance against the Allied occupation. British intelligence consistently underestimated Kemal's influence and the popular support for nationalist resistance. Over-reliance on old Ottoman elites led to unreliable information and a failure to grasp the unifying power of Kemal's message. In Samsun, British intelligence reports minimized nationalist mobilization, even as movements gathered support nearby. Despite a significant naval presence, the miscalculation of Kemal's importance remained ineffective. The Amasya Circular, a key step toward national organization, announced the need for a national congress and sovereignty. British surveillance failed to notice the planning, allowing the nationalist message to spread effectively. Britain offered diplomatic backing for the Greek landing at Smyrna and covertly supported Greek expansion into Anatolian territories. Intelligence reports were used to justify interventionist policies, which fueled nationalist resistance. The Greek landing at Smyrna in May 1919, supported diplomatically by Britain, was a military intervention that immediately fueled nationalist resistance. Interventionist policies were justified by intelligence reports. British espionage networks operated in Constantinople, concentrated in the Pera and Galata districts. Agents gathered data on the local political situation, but intelligence reports gave conflicting assessments of nationalist strength. Britain attempted to use the Sultan's government as a proxy, relying on unpopular Ottoman collaborators. This miscalculation of the Sultan's legitimacy unintentionally fueled Turkish nationalist unity. British authorities controlled and manipulated the Ottoman press, but this suppression sparked a nationalist counter-propaganda effort. Media control failed to contain Kemal's message, which successfully spread through other channels. British strategy relied on the unpopular Damat Farid government, viewed as collaborators. This over-reliance on elites undercut British political strategy and inadvertently fueled nationalist unity due to the Sultan's lack of legitimacy. British intelligence efforts to disrupt the nationalist Sivas Congress failed to prevent the critical meeting. Nationalist consolidation of power was unstoppable, and Kemal's national message continued to spread. Intelligence suffered from blind spots, relying on former Ottoman elites and misreading popular rural sentiment. Agents failed to grasp the strength of popular nationalist support and the unifying power of Mustafa Kemal's leadership. British officers actively interfered in local Anatolian affairs, attempting to influence tribal leaders. This meddling unintentionally fueled anti-imperialist sentiment and undermined the centralized British strategy. British intelligence attempted to block nationalist arms supply lines. However, nationalist smuggling networks quickly adapted to the interdiction, finding new ways for covert supply lines to operate effectively. The Harvard mission was a U.S. fact-finding delegation. Britain attempted to influence American foreign policy, but nationalist diplomatic efforts successfully outmaneuvered them, informing future United States policy. The Treaty of Sèvres, signed in August 1920, was largely drafted by Britain and included harsh terms for the Ottoman Empire. However, the Turkish nationalists vehemently rejected the treaty. After the Treaty of Sèvres, alarm grew at Turkish nationalist military successes. Intelligence reports expressed confusion over Kemal's alliances and British authorities seriously underestimated his power. Alarm grew over Turkish nationalist military successes, and reports acknowledged the inevitability of Kemal's dominance. Authorities seriously underestimated his growing power, while intelligence expressed confusion over his alliances. Britain became increasingly isolated as French and Italian allies began negotiating with Kemal. Allied unity fractured over the Turkish nationalist movement, recognizing the shift in power. Britain attempted to exploit the Kocaeli Kurdish uprisings, but nationalist forces effectively suppressed the rebellion. This suppression strengthened Kemal's authority and control, and British efforts to divide the nationalists failed. British officials feared a Bolshevik and Kemalist alignment, creating a, quote, Green Army panic. Intelligence reports exaggerated the actual threat and scope, driven by fears of Soviet expansion, causing authorities to overestimate the danger. In Ankara, the National Assembly's legitimacy grew, and nationalist authorities established strong governance. This power consolidation strengthened Turkish nationalist resilience, deepening British miscalculations regarding Kemal's control. British arrests of key Ottoman officials, known as the Malta Exiles, were framed by nationalists as anti-imperialist action. This provided a significant propaganda victory for Kemal and unintentionally increased Turkish nationalist unity. British naval intelligence misread Black Sea troop movements, leading to an ineffective British presence. Poor regional coordination hampered espionage efforts, and agents failed to anticipate nationalist logistics routes. The Çerkez-Etham affair saw Britain attempt to exploit internal nationalist divisions to undermine Kemal. However, nationalist forces successfully neutralized the military threat, strengthening Kemal's internal authority and control. The Battle of Inonu in January 1921 brought nationalist military success that shocked British intelligence officials. The outcome showed the increasing strength and resilience of Turkish resistance, surprising British reports. British strategy collapsed due to a lack of unified policy and direction, and the inability to find reliable local partners. The Ankara Pact highlighted Allied disunity, and Kemal's growing power forced strategy abandonment. Britain began quiet negotiations with the Turkish nationalists, leading to the inevitable official recognition of nationalist power. British policy shifted toward more realistic approaches, and the previous occupation strategy was slowly abandoned. Britain initiated quiet negotiations with Turkish nationalists, realizing the official recognition of Ankara's power was inevitable. Policy shifted to a more realistic approach, abandoning the previous occupation strategy. The 1921 London Conference attempted to salvage the Treaty of Sèvres. Nationalist representatives gained crucial diplomatic legitimacy, despite Britain's efforts to maintain Allied unity. Their presence was a major step forward. Intelligence reports finally acknowledged Kemal's dominant power. British agents could no longer deny nationalist success. Authorities shifted policy due to military victories, fully realizing the failure to contain the movement. Growing British public fatigue with imperial commitments, reflected in the press, highlighted the cost and difficulty of the Anatolian intervention. Public pressure increased for a policy shift toward withdrawal. Britain began preparing for a complete withdrawal from Anatolia, abandoning the previous military occupation strategy. The failure to contain the Turkish nationalist movement was fully realized, forcing a major shift in British foreign policy. British intelligence efforts were limited by internal structural failures and overconfidence in covert actions, which led to misreading nationalist strength. The use of espionage unintentionally strengthened Turkish nationalist unity, ultimately failing to contain Kemal's national movement. British intelligence misread Kemal's unifying nationalist strength and over-relied on unreliable Ottoman elites for information. Interventionist policies, such as the Smyrna landing, fueled anti-imperial sentiment, and a lack of unified strategy allowed nationalist power to consolidate. Kemal effectively used anti-imperialist rhetoric to unify the people. His nationalist message focused on sovereignty and national unity, which successfully undermined British propaganda and censorship and framed British actions as foreign interference. Scholarly interpretations debate the effectiveness of British intelligence. Traditional views emphasize the clarity of British failure, while revisionist historians focus on internal Turkish divisions. The role of individual agents versus structural failure is still debated.